Welcome to this session where I'm going to be talking about MECFS and physical activity. So I'm talking about this topic because someone in my Facebook group says, I try and work out, I lift weights and do exercise. That will be followed by a week of soreness. How would I reframe this? What am I telling myself when I feel symptoms and trying to redirect? So I'm going to share some thoughts and ideas based on that post in my group, and a couple of other people have made some comments, so I'll speak to the comments that they've made as well. So in terms of what I'm sharing, I'm just going to share some thoughts, but want to make it really clear there's no shame and blame. Appreciate that you are on a learning curve, you're learning how to manage this condition, and there is going to be some trial and error. Okay, so firstly, let's think about why it's important to kind of get our approach to movement right. And I'd say it's important because if we don't, then we can get stuck in a pattern of boom and bust, which I'm sure is familiar to a lot of people with MECFS. If we do too much, then, this is a pattern that certainly I recognise in myself, and I've seen other people describe the same pattern. So let's say your energy is kind of low, but then it starts to pick up, and there's going to be a period where it's on the rise, and there's going to be a natural period when it's on the fall. And let's say our activity levels have been very low because we've got no energy. As the energy starts to build, that should have been a curvy line, but never mind. We think, great, I've got energy. So we do stuff, and unfortunately the pattern is that instead of stopping when the energy starts to dip, we carry on because for whatever reason, and then we get to the point where we have to stop because we've used up this energy here that we didn't have. So now we've got overdrawn in the energy bank, and that's going to result in a period where we're back to not doing very much. And that pattern gets repeated over and over again. This was a period where people weren't doing much activity because their energy was low, and we just simply keep getting caught in this loop of energy rises again, and we start doing activity, and instead of stopping when we need to, we keep going for whatever reason, and I'll talk a little bit about that. Okay, and the problem with this boom and bust pattern is it actually just hinders progress. It means that we deplete our energy. If you think about an energy bucket, so in normal times it takes 1 unit of resources to create 1 unit of energy. Okay, let's draw a little battery. But when we are in the red, it may take 2 or 3 units, to create a unit of energy. Anyway, you get the idea, okay? So that's why when we are depleted, it takes much longer to create energy, okay? Because it's called the Krebs cycle, but it explains why when we run out of energy, I won't go into the detail of it, but it explains why when we run out of energy, it takes longer to get back to having energy. So it's really important that we try and avoid getting in the red, okay? And I'll talk about that a bit later. Dr. Sarah Myhill has a tip about how much energy we should use. Number 1 is it kind of gets us stuck in that pattern of boom and bust. Number 2, it hinders progress. And number 3, it means we're missing out, which inevitably leads to understandable frustration. The mistakes people make, number 1, they have a bit of energy, and as I've just talked about, do too much. So they overspend, okay? And that results in a kind of all or nothing thing. When we've got energy, we go full out, and then that results in not having energy and we can't do anything. Now, there is a time when it's crucial to conserve our energy, So, for example, imagine there are kind of 3 phases of MECFS. There's when we're in the red, and how we approach things when we're in the red is going to be a bit different to when we're kind of in the orange, or kind of whatever that colour is, yellowish. And that's going to be different how we approach things, activity, when we're in the green. Okay, so we need to recognize where we are when we think about what activity. Are we red? Are we orange? Are we green? What's interesting is because we can get used to being very cautious when we're in the red, and that's understandable, we need to conserve our energy. Even when we start to make improvements, sometimes people are still kind of operating from this place when actually they need to change their strategy. So I've talked before about examples about this. I remember working with one person who was very cautious about leaving his flat, and we looked at how he might do that in a really gentle way. And I've made a video about this. I posted it this week, so check that out, video on small steps, which is on my YouTube channel. And he found by just breaking things down into small steps, he was able to build up his activity. And within a couple of weeks, he walked back from a cafe. His parents drove him to a cafe, and he walked back. It was a 5-minute walk, and that was a breakthrough for him because he hadn't left his flat for a long time. Okay, so there's times when we do too much, when we get a bit of energy, and that's because we haven't had energy, and so we kind of get overexcited and use up that energy. There's times when it's crucial to conserve our energy, but also one of the mistakes people can make is being overcautious when actually it's appropriate to kind of test the waters. Okay, overspend, we can be overcautious. So here's the thing, when we get it right, when we get our approach to movement right, then good things happen. It actually strengthens, it actually helps build stamina and energy. It can be a difference to how much progress you're making. As I say, just consider that if we get caught in this boom and bust pattern, just repeat that pattern over again. And that's very, having these periods where we're not being able to do much, it's frustrating. It's, it's understandable if you get fed up with it. Okay, so that's why it's really important to break that pattern. So let's talk about what we need to do. So the key message really is that what we need to do is we need to have a sustainable movement strategy. Okay, so in order to do that, as I say, we need to just, number one, be aware of where we are on that graphic. Okay, because when your battery's flat, your approach to energy is going to be very different to when you're in the orange, when you're in the green. Okay, and actually something to consider, when we're in the green, we still need to have a balanced lifestyle. It's completely fine to go for it at times, and it's important to recover. So for instance, when I go to festivals, it's pretty full on, and everyone at the end of it is pretty tired because they've been having lots of late nights. We walk miles. I usually have about 20,000 steps on my step counter each day. I'm at a festival, and Dr. Sarah Myhill tells a story of taking a horse for a ride, and she says that when they finish the ride, the horse has a break for a few days. Okay, so well person might exert themselves, but then they have a break. And actually, let's just get rid of this timer. this is important. I'll give you an extreme example of this. I remember reading Ranulph Fiennes' book. He's an ex-army officer. He was in the SAS. Tough guy. He started doing expeditions, and I think on one occasion he went to Antarctica, and there was a picture of him as a 48-year-old looking like this rugged, strong, healthy man. And I think the expedition was about, it might have been 18 months. I might be wrong about that. I'd have to check the book. It's quite long anyway. But at the end of that expedition, the conditions were so tough that the picture of him, he looked like he'd aged about 15 years. He looked as if he was in his early 60s. And that was just from 18 months of really tough, environment that he was in. My point is that it's really important that we, approach things in a sustainable way, even when your energy is good. So let's kind of break that down a bit more. So consider that there are 3 types of physical activity. Strengthening, stretching, and stimulating. Okay, and what I'd like you to consider is, it might be that at the moment stimulating exercise isn't appropriate for you because your body just can't take it. So focus on what you can do. Sometimes I see that people are trying to do kind of physical activity at levels that their body just can't cope with. Okay, so it's really important. Fundamentals is you need to establish your baseline. What can your body do without severe payback? Okay, so the person who posted in my group was saying that they felt sore for a week afterwards. I'd suggest if that's the case, then maybe at the moment the level of activity that you're doing is just too much. Okay, so consider that. Okay, if you're experiencing symptoms which are beyond normal for that long, it sounds like you're just doing too much. So you've got to find where your baseline is. And next thing you've got to do is you've got to beat the boom and bust pattern that we just talked about. Okay, because that will keep you stuck. And in order to do that, you need to identify your drivers. What are the drivers that make you want to carry on when your body probably needs to stop? It's going to be different for different people. So it's important to identify those things and address those things. It's important that you have strategies for dealing with a dip so that your body can recover as quickly as possible. And it's important to have strategies to avoid cumulative fatigue. Now, this is a concept I've talked about. I think someone else might have coined that terminology. It may have been a woman called Raya, who's a young woman who's a sharp woman. So I won't take credit for that, but it's a phenomenon that I've talked about, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. But actually what we need to do is to find that sweet spot. So imagine your energy is improving over time. The trick here is to ensure that we are kind of staying within your energy envelope Dr. Sarah Myhill talks about 80%. She says don't use any more than 80%, because then the 20% that's left over can be used for healing. Okay? Whereas if we go over that, even if it might be just a small amount over it, but then your body is actually having to use energy, not for healing, but for repair. Okay? And obviously we don't want to be constantly in repair mode, we want to be in healing mode. Okay? So just to make that clear, it's just really important that we just ensuring that we kind of staying below the energy envelope, so that we're still got a bit of energy in the bank to do the repair work. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, for me, when I had MECFS, it was always a balancing act, because if I did too much, then I'd experience symptoms. If I didn't do enough exercise as I started to get better, then I wouldn't sleep well, and then that would I would have symptoms as a result of that. So it is a balancing act. It's kind of seesaw, and you do have to... What I learned is that I had to use my intuition, because, when I had MECFS, we didn't have step counters and heart rate monitors and all these apps that we have now. So I did just have to practice going by my intuition and doing an amount of activity that actually just felt right. Next point. It's important also to teach our body that we are safe. There's certain things we can do to encourage the body to feel we're safe. So for instance, just relating to what I was just saying about this client who was not leaving his flat, and he was hesitant because he was worried it was going to cause a relapse. And so what we did is we broke the task down. Rather than him setting himself a big goal that felt a bit scary, might be goal to get to the cafe, we broke it down into smaller steps. And by doing that, he felt more relaxed doing these small steps, and then was just able to build up. Okay? So, and one of the things I teach people is this idea of, is there a tiger in the room? Because often we're putting our body in a state of fight or flight, and we're responding to something as if it's like a tiger in the room. So for him, the idea of going to cafe was like that there's a tiger in the room. But actually, when we broke it down into these smaller pieces, then he felt, yeah, I can do that. I can just walk to the first flight of stairs and then just come back into my flat. And when I'm ready, I can walk down one flight of stairs or half a flight of stairs and walk back to my flat. And he kept doing that, and that's how he built up his confidence. Yeah, we've got to find that sweet spot, okay? Going back to this. So someone commented that they were noticing that they were doing 10-15 minutes of activity, but when they went up to 25 minutes of activity, then they found their body couldn't cope with it and they'd relapse and go back to 10 minutes. So a couple of things to say about that. Number one, the fact that someone is able to extend their activity levels from 10 minutes, 15 minutes to 25, even if it's only for a short period, is a sign of progress. And what is needed is a bit of fine-tuning. Okay, so what I'd get you to consider is, let's say someone is doing 15 minutes of activity. Okay, so that's 15 minutes. How long are you doing? That's, let's say, day one. How long are you doing 15 minutes for? Are you doing it for long enough before you extend and go to the next level? That's the first thing to think about. Second thing to think about is, how's the stress? one of the things I realised as I started to feel better is that there were days, initially I just had one setting for physical activity, and that was to go hard. So I'd get on my bike, usually in the evening, and I'd cycle hard round the park for an hour. And what I realised is that there were some days when actually I was feeling quite tired, and it was still good for me to do some physical activity, but I might just go for a walk for an hour, and I'd still get fresh air, I'd still get exercise, it would still enhance my sleep, but I wasn't going full out. And what I realised, there were times when I was pushing myself when actually my body really didn't want that, because I'd had, quite a challenging day, or maybe I'd not slept well, I'd been woken up in the night, whatever. So it's really important that we have a flexible approach. The other thing I get you to consider is this idea of cumulative fatigue. So we might not be realising it, but it might be that in whatever you're doing, it's not obviously over the energy envelope, but it is actually just consistently going over. You might not notice it. And so there comes a point where it actually catches up with you and you have a bit of a dip. Okay? So one strategy for that is, as I've just said, is, we need to have that flexible approach. It might be you do 25 minutes, but there might be some days when you think, actually, let's say, for example, you might be doing 25 minutes now, but it might be on one day you think, oh, actually, I'm not feeling so up to it today. I'll just go a bit easier. I'll go easier on that day. Then I'll go back up to there. I've told this story before, but I had a lodger once. She was a fit, healthy person. She went to the gym. She lived a fit, a very busy, active life. However, once a month, she'd have a weekend where she literally laid in bed the whole weekend. And she might just go out on the Sunday evening for a meal or something, but she would just take it easy and recharge. And I was very impressed, because I thought it seemed like she really had a good intuitive sense of what worked for her. So let's see, any comments? Janice says, thank you so much. I thought better, but last week I think I did too much. Yeah. Martina says, I couldn't walk anywhere near an hour right now. I get that, Martina. There's one point I couldn't walk for a minute. And, when I had to just do a brief walk, to go downstairs to have a meal or whatever, my body wasn't really liking it. But literally at one point I couldn't walk for a minute outside without really suffering from it. So I have been there. There was a time when I was literally in bed all day, sleeping for 3 hours, having a meal, sleeping again, etc. So let's see if there's any final thoughts I want to share with you. If you've got any comments, pop them in the chat. So yeah, final point. So this person who posted this comment was asking the question, should I be telling myself if I feel symptoms and I'm trying to redirect? So it sounds like she's talking about brain training techniques. So the question I'd ask you is, what are you telling yourself? Is what you're telling yourself activating the sympathetic nervous system, or is it activating the parasympathetic nervous system? And really, that's what you need to be doing. You need to be activating the parasympathetic nervous system. So reassuring yourself, soothing yourself, reaffirming that you've got this. You're going to come out of this and you're going to learn from this experience. You're going to move forward. I really encourage people to have a little personal handbook where you write down strategies so that when you do approach things in a good way, let's say you've got some energy, you do a bit of activity, but then let's say you set a timer, or you kind of decide when you're going to have a break whilst you're still feeling good. Write that down. This is my strategy for when I have energy. Refer back to it. Remind yourself of it before you do some activity. Okay? So, Joe says, this is a brilliant explanation. Thank you. You're welcome. The problem is that I'm always fatigued, no matter if I do nothing the whole day or cycle for 5 hours. Okay, so what I'd be curious, Doris, if I was chatting to you, is to get a bit more information, maybe to score some metrics so that I could get a clearer idea of what other factors might be at play. For instance, one of the questions I'd be really interested to find out is, what are your stress levels like? Often, and it's completely understandable that people's stress levels are high because they're not able to do what they want to do. So that is something, and I don't know if we've had a chat, can't remember, but I do every week a free session where we do an audit to just find out what's going on. I used to do that for an hour. I don't do that for an hour anymore. We can spend 15 minutes, half an hour, whatever works for you. I'm not going to be selling anything. If you want to know about my training, you have to ask, and I'll send you a video. So I won't be really doing any selling. So if you haven't had that, you're welcome to have that. If you're not able to physically chat face to face, then I can send you the questions, and I can message you about your answers. So if you'd like one of those strategy sessions, just put the word strategy in the comments and tag me, type my name until it comes up, click on it, and I should then get a notification that you've tagged me. I'll send you a booking link if you'd like one of those sessions. So if you've got any questions, put them in the chat. If not, we'll pause there. We've done about half an hour, that's long enough. So I'll give you a moment. And maybe we'll finish with a little exercise that I've been teaching my clients, which they really like. We were doing it a lot on the Calm course that we've just finished, and people seem to like it, which is an exercise some of you may be familiar with called Flip the Switch. So if you're up for that, hang around. So what I'd like you to do is, can't see any questions or comments, so what I'd like you to do, obviously only if it's safe to do so, is close your eyes. Okay, don't worry, Doris, I've seen your message. So yeah, close your eyes, and what I'd like you to do is just, whether you're sitting or lying, I'd just like you to adjust your posture. Imagine there's a thread pulling you up from the top of your head. Just ensure your posture's good. Maybe symmetrically. If you're sitting, you might just want to put both feet on the floor, hands in your lap. And step 2 is just to take a breath in. If it's comfortable to do so, breathe in through your nose, breathe into your belly. As you breathe out through your nose, just ensuring that out breath is just a little bit longer than your in breath. When we do that, we're accessing the parasympathetic state. And what I'd like to do now is to just connect to that best version of yourself. I'd like you to consider that you have the capacity for wisdom, for calm, for pragmatism, for patience, for acceptance, for trust, for compassion, and for other qualities. Just connect to that part of you. Maybe you don't connect to that part of you often enough. I'd like you to consider, what would it be like if you just did this exercise 1 or 2 or 3 times a day. There have been times where you've just responded to challenging situations in a resourceful way, operating from that best version of you. You might give that part of you a name and say, hi, whatever the name is. The guy who created this exercise, a chap called Brian Johnson, calls his best version of himself Optimus. Okay, you might call it anything you like. So just connect to that best version of you. And now what I'd like you to do is, as you breathe in and out, just put a smile on your face. Okay, And as you smile, that might make you smile. I'd like you to just take your breaths in with that smile on your face. As you breathe in through your nose, into your belly, breathing out through your nose. You might imagine your breath as a colour. Breathe in that colour. And if it's comfortable, you may just put your hand on your heart, your hand on your belly. As you breathe in that colour, breathing in whatever you need. Compassion, kindness towards yourself, forgiveness, love, whatever it is. And as you breathe out, just letting go of anything that no longer serves you. And as you go through those 5 steps that I've just taken you through, you're flipping the switch, you're activating the parasympathetic state. So, thanks everybody for joining me. As I say, if you've got any questions, either send me a private message or pop them in the chat. If you're watching on YouTube, click the link below to send me a message to access the flip the switch exercise I've just taken you through. And if you'd like that exercise and you're watching, just again, you can send me a private message. But for now, I'll say thanks for watching, thanks for showing up, and bye for now.